This video kind of backwards. I started off with the concept of traditional diets and whatnot, and then I went into nutrient deficiencies. And now I'm going to get into what chimpanzees actually eat and basically that sort of thing. So 10 things chimps do eat, okay? So they eat figs, okay? Aside from being nutritious and delicious, figs account for almost half of a chimpanzee's diet, providing an excellent source of energy. Fruit. Chimpanzees eat a wide variety of fruit, including mangoes, bananas, watermelons, and apples. However, unlike humans, chimpanzees can't import out-of-season fruit, so they are stuck with whatever is in season in the region. Now, this is the thing, I went over this in my how to basically, can a fruitarian diet be balanced? And yes, it can, because it involves beans and low sugar fruits like eggplants, tomatoes, and things like that. Now, I recommend sticking to the more low sugared fruits. So nuts and seeds, blossoms and leaves. So the most common type of nut chimpanzees eat is the oil palm nut, but they are also known to eat cola and panda nuts. It's easy to tell if a chimpanzee is eating cola or panda nuts. The shells are so tough that the only way to crack them is to whack the nuts with a hard stone. When fruit is in short supply, chimpanzees will eat a variety of types of seeds, a variety type of leaves, so greens, flowers, tree bark, so cinnamon. People would eat like cinnamon, pine bark, etc. Seeds, however, they prefer fruit. Insects. You might be saying, well, people don't eat insects. What do you call crustaceans? Honey. Chimpanzees love honey. I don't recommend eating honey, though. Meat and eggs. They do actually eat a small amount of meat and eggs. It accounts for about 6% of their total diet. Palm wine. They will eat naturally fermented palm wine. They eat medicinal plants. Chimpanzees intuitively know the medicinal value of various plants. In the Gombe Stream National Park, chimpanzees have been observed eating Aspelia, a plant that helps rid their digestive system of parasites. Chimpanzees have also been observed eating soil, which contains anti-malarial minerals, elm bark, okay. And, is that interesting? So chimpanzees use herbal and mineral medicine. They've been observed eating soil, which contains anti-malarial minerals, and they've also been observed eating medicinal plants to get rid of parasites. Milk. Of course, chimpanzees drink milk when they're infants. Okay, and we're going to move... wait, hold on 1 second here. Yeah, we're going to move on here. So people might find it odd, but, humans, hunter-gatherers, don't really eat that differently from chimpanzees. The main difference is that we cook our food, okay? So humans in a natural environment, the hunter-gatherer diet, so what I believe is important is that you start with a diet with as natural as possible, and then you add... Like, what is the human's natural diet? Well, let's look at the chimpanzee's diet and the hunter-gatherer's diet. So, and then you supplement with the nutrients necessary to increase the ability of the organism to thrive. So, hunter-gatherer populations are remarkable for their excellent metabolic and cardiovascular health, and thus are often used as models in public health in an effort to understand the root evolutionary cause of non-communicable diseases. Here we review recent work on health, activity, energetics, and diet among hunter-gatherers, as well as recent fossil and archaeological discoveries. Okay. So the idea that life was better in the past is not necessarily true, but it is a common recurring theme in Western thought. Origin stories from the Lost Garden of Eden to Genesis and to The Golden Age of ancient Greece describe a utopian past where humans lived in harmony with nature and were healthy and well-nourished. Rousseau's ruminations on human origins and the noble savage of Enlightenment, the Enlightenment philosophy, and Marx and Engel's nostalgic descriptions of early farming communities all paint pictures of healthful ideal prior to the corruption wrought by progress and industrialization. Of course, we know that's not really true. Over the past 150 years, evolutionary anthropology, armed with an ever-expanding fossil and ethnographic record of human evolution and diversity, has enabled us to move beyond mere speculation and to an evidence-based understanding of our species' past. Genetic and fossil evidence shows our hominid lineage diverged from our sister lineage of chimpanzee. The hominid lineage and as epidemiology developed through the 20th century alongside a growing understanding of our species evolution, it became common in public health to draw on our hunter-gatherer past to explain the rise of non-communicable diseases, diabetes, obesity, cancer, and heart disease, in the developed world. By the 1980s and 90s, this work had broadened into a focus on diseases of civilization within a larger field of evolutionary medicine, and they really are in many ways. The idea that modern industrialized environments depart radically from the environments in which humans evolved. So keep in mind, that's why humans in modern office settings have zoochosis. Remember, we were talking about zoochosis in the first video. Okay. For example, the World Health Organization states that obesity is caused in part by an increase in physical inactivity due to the increasingly sedentary nature of many forms of work, changing modes of transportation, and increasing urbanization. There can be little doubt that an evolutionary perspective is important in understanding and mitigating disease. However, an evolutionary perspective is only as good as our understanding of the past. Without an accurate account of past diets, activity levels, disease profiles, and other relevant characteristics, we will likely draw the wrong conclusions. Garbage in, garbage out. So, in diagnosing the root evolutionary causes of diseases of civilization, notably much of the foundational work in this area developed without detailed quantitative measures of diet, activity, or energetics in living hunter-gatherer or subsistence farming populations, much less those from the distant past. Can we be confident that conceptions of the past employed in public health are not romanticized caricatures of some lost Eden? Field work among small-scale societies over the past few decades, as well as recent fossil discoveries, has greatly improved our understanding of how our shared evolutionary past. Okay, here we review these studies. Ethics statement, blah, 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 lifespan. Due largely to high infant mortality, so keep that in mind, it's mostly due to high infant mortality from infectious disease, the expected lifespan at birth for hunter-gatherer populations is low, typically 40s or 30s or 40s. Then developed countries today. A common misinterpretation of this observation is to assume that few hunter-gatherers reach older ages. If this were true, the near absence of chronic diseases in small-scale populations could be explained simply by a lack of adults living long enough to develop them. Further, if people in small-scale populations inevitably die young, they might not be useful models for public health. In fact, demographic analyses of small-scale populations show that adult survivorship is similar in some ways to industrialized societies, with adults roughly living into their 60s and 70s and even beyond. Gorvan and Kaplan, in a review of hunter-gatherer and subsistence farmer mortality data across 12 populations, report that 60% of newborns in these populations survive to age 15 and 40% to age 45. Those who survive to age 45 can expect to live another 20 years, so about to age 65. Indeed, the modal age at death for hunter-gatherer populations examined by Gervin and Kaplan is 72 years of age. Range is 68 to 78 years, near the value for the U.S. population of 85 years. Nevertheless, in wealthier nations, improvements in hygiene, diet, and healthcare over the last 100 years have added several decades to life expectancies at birth relative to those observed in hunter-gatherers. So while we're kicking ass in hygiene and healthcare, we're not kicking so much ass in reducing the levels of chronic diseases. As Dr. Wallach says, we have the most expensive healthcare, but we don't have the best, okay? And we need to find out why, and we need to remedy that, okay? Old age like that recorded for recent hunter-gatherers is not a recent phenomenon. Analysis of fossil evidence suggests the proportion of adults surviving to 40-plus years has been stable since at least the Upper Paleolithic, approximately 50,000 years ago. Comparison of mortality curves with chimpanzees indicates that humans have evolved much greater adult survivorship, but that in favorable ecological contexts with lower predation and increased food availability. Chimpanzee life expectancy at birth can approach that of human hunter-gatherers. High rates of survival into the 60s, 70s, and beyond are hypothesized to be an evolutionarily derived feature of human life history, driven by selection for grandparental investment in grandchildren. So the way that we have these extended families created an evolutionary adaptation for longer life. That's the theory anyway. In hunter-gatherer and other small-scale populations, the presence of grandparents, particularly grandmothers, improves grandchild growth and survivorship. Cause of death is notoriously difficult to ascertain for hunter-gatherers and other populations. Okay, obesity and metabolic diseases, as expected for populations with high levels of physical activity and limited access to processed, highly caloric foods. Obesity and metabolic diseases are rare among hunter-gatherers. Walker and colleagues compiled body size and life history, blah, blah, blah. Looking within the Hadza hunter-gatherer population, they find little evidence of overweight or obesity. Okay. Other small-scale societies have low prevalence. These are, I've gone over all these in previous videos, the Hadza, the Tsunami, the Shuar, and the average U.S. Fossils do not preserve signals of adiposity, but the low prevalence of obesity among hunter-gatherers today and in the recent past suggests excess body fat was rare in our evolutionary history. Cardiovascular disease. Hunter-gatherers and subsisting farming populations are notable for their remarkable cardiovascular health. Heart and vascular disease account for a negligible portion of death. Okay, the difference between small-scale and industrialized populations is most stark at older ages. More than 60% of U.S. adults 60-plus years are hypertensive, while less than 30% of hunter-gatherers and subsistent farmers 60-plus years show even mild hypertension. The Tsimane, a population with a mixed hunter-gatherer and subsistence farming economy living in the Amazon rainforest, offers a useful case study in heart health. Cardiovascular disease has been intensely studied among the Tsimane for over 2 decades, despite relative high levels of C-reactive protein, a marker of inflammation associated with increased risk of cardiovascular disease. Tsimane adults show very low rates of hypertension with age and almost no evidence of peripheral artery disease, even for individuals over 60. Fewer cardiovascular measures are available for other small-scale societies, but like the Tsimane, many showed little or no increase in blood pressure with age. Other non-communicable diseases. Other diseases of civilization have received relatively little attention in studies of hunter-gatherers or subsistence farmers. A small number of cancer deaths are reported in well-studied small-scale populations with large samples, particularly among the elderly. But cancers are often difficult to detect without modern medical screening, and thus cancer prevalence is largely unknown. Cognitive decline and dementia are a recent focus in some groups. In early studies, there are intriguing, for example, apolipoprotein E4 ally associated with earlier age-related cognitive decline in Alzheimer's disease in industrialized populations is associated with better cognitive function among elderly Simani. Additional work among small-scale populations is needed to understand the environmental and genetic influences on non-communicable diseases. Physical activity and energy expenditure. Daily physical activity among hunter-gatherers. Okay, hunter-gatherers and subsistence farmers have high levels of physical activity. Much of the ecological research among these populations has measured activity through time budgets or distance traveled. Okay, so the advent of accelerometry and heart rate monitoring has added to our understanding of activity levels and improved comparisons across population. Accelerometry-based assessment of the Simani and small-scale societies indicate high levels of low intensity and moderate intensity activity. Not hard, high intensity activity, but low and moderate activity. So our heart rate measures of Hadza adults indicate remarkably high levels of daily physical activity, again mostly at low and moderate levels. Hadza adults accumulate over 135 minutes of moderate and vigorous activity per day, several times more than adults in the US and Europe. These high levels of physical activity are not offset by increased time resting, at least as measured by sleep patterns. Despite the lack of electricity and artificial light, the Hadza, Simani, San, and other hunter-gatherer and subsistence farming groups sleep the same amount, 5.9 to 7.1 hours per night, as adults in industrialized populations. Daily energy expenditure, again, it's kind of the same thing. Diet. Now, this is what's funny. So, this is like with chimps. Chimps have a very diverse diet. Dietary diversity among hunter-gatherers is so vast that dietary universals are few. All human groups cook their food. And appear to have done so for at least the past 250,000 years, and likely much longer. And nearly all hunter-gatherer populations today and in the recent past are known to have a mix of both meat and plant foods in their diet. So they all eat meat and plant foods. Okay, not solidly meat, so nobody's a carnivore and nobody's a vegan. Only one was reported to subsist on no fish or game beyond these broad strokes. Dietary diversity is the rule, blah, blah, blah. It has been suggested that modern processed diets are more energy dense than those of the Paleolithic past. Okay. So, let's see here. We calculated dietary energy density. So this has to do with caloric restriction in some ways. They calculated dietary energy densities for the Hadza, combining long-term data on estimated monthly diet intake. This approach. So among lean and obese cohorts, respectively. Okay. These dietary assessments, which rely on rough and often methodologically opaque approximations of food intake and additional estimates of macronutrient content for plant and animal foods, are difficult to reconcile with more detailed ethnographic and nutritional studies of hunter-gatherer diets. First, Murdoch entries, blah, blah, blah. This is So, okay. The detailed focal follow observations have shown that men eat substantial amounts of honey this is the Hadza, out of camp while foraging, which leads them to estimate that 16 to 20% of the annual diet of foraging Hadza is derived from honey and bee larvae. So they're getting protein when they're eating the bee larvae. Second, many well-studied small-scale populations obtain considerably less than 50% of their calories from fish and game. For example, So they're getting less than 50% from meat. So keep that in mind. So they're eating like chimps. Chimps eat honey. Chimps eat bugs. Okay? So, again, I wouldn't recommend a high honey diet, but you have to understand these people are moving around quite a bit, but they're getting less than 50% of their calories from fish and game. Okay. The data, 45, While the macronutrient content of hunter-gatherer diets can be debated, it seems clear that they are micronutrient rich, as you'll remember from me talking about Weston Price, and likely more healthful than diets in industrial likely. They're definitely more healthful. Wild plant foods tend to have a lower glycemic index than processed foods and very little salt. Hunter-gatherer diets also contain a higher proportion of dietary fiber than the typical modern diets. They estimate fiber intake to be 100 to 150 grams per day. Okay, so 100 to 150 grams per day for Paleolithic populations, far greater than the 20 grams per day typical intake in the USA. Their assessment of the Hadza diet support this view. So the Hadza are one of those groups that carnivores try to say is proof that people subsist on a carnivore diet, but yet somehow they get less than 50% of their calories from game and fish. Diets in small-scale societies are generally associated with favorable blood profiles. Okay, this is like the blood fats and whatnot. What do hunter-gatherers teach us about public health? The remarkable metabolic and cardiovascular health of hunter-gatherers and other small-scale populations has long made them attractive models in public health, given the similarity in health profiles across ethnic groups, meaning these people are racially distinct, but yet they all are healthy. So they're genetically distinct people that are geographically separated from each other. Okay, they eat different foods, but they're eating the same kinds of foods. This goes into the same thing as the traditional diets, like the Okinawan diet, the Mediterranean diet, and the different Blue Zones diet. These people eat different foods, but they're eating in a similar manner, and they're living in a similar manner, and this manner helps to promote longevity. So it is clearly their environments rather than genetics that keep people within small-scale societies. And that's one of the things that's interesting about the centenarians of Loma Linda, the Adventists. The Adventists are the only centenarians in the Blue Zone study that they synthesized their longevity pattern through observations, and then they implemented those observations, and you have people like Ellen G. White, John Harvey Kellogg, and Jethro Kloss, etc., that helped to create this longevity lifestyle. Okay, and later you have people like Paul Bragg, who was not an Adventist but followed similar health concepts, and you have these people that synthesized a centenarian lifestyle that resulted in the creation of centenarians, whereas these hunter-gatherers and a lot of these other centenarians, like the Sardinians and the Icarians and all these folks, and the Okinawans, they wandered upon their healthy eating patterns and healthy lifestyle patterns, mostly by dumb luck. So what you have to understand is the health benefits of exercise are well established, and increasing physical activity is already a common focus in public health worldwide. Measures of the volume and intensity of daily activity in small-scale societies might aid in sharpening these efforts. So what does it say? It says we want low to moderate activity, not heavy activity. The surprising discovery that high levels of physical activity do not invariably result in elevated T and PAL forces us to rethink the mechanisms by which exercise promotes health. The hypothesis that industrialized populations are prone to metabolic disease because they are less active and therefore expend fewer calories per day is not supported. The reason why is because the body adapts to physical activity. So that's one of the problems with using exercise to maintain weight is the body adapts to energy expenditure because it's very efficient. So you can't really use exercise to manage weight unless you increase the amount of exercise, and then your body will adapt to it. So what they're saying is these people's bodies have adapted to the expenditure of energy, so they're not expending more energy. Their bodies are simply working more efficiently. The lack of correspondence between objectively measured physical activity, blah, 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 yada, yada. Finally, it is worth considering what other aspects of traditional lifestyles, in addition to diet and physical activity, might contribute to the remarkable health of hunter-gatherers. Close friendships. And I'm going to get into this with logotherapy, and I'm going to get into this with the Maslowian hierarchy of needs. So close friendships and family bonds. Low level, this is the same for the blue zones, especially the Okinawan blue zone and the Loma Linda blue zone. So close friendships and family bonds, low levels of social and economic inequality, and lots of time spent outdoors are typical in hunter-gatherer populations and other small-scale societies. The absence of these in modern societies is associated with chronic social stress. Chronic social stress and a range of non-communicable diseases, including metabolic disease and obesity. So think of this, okay? So our environment is so alien. It's not us that are aliens to modern society. It's modern society that's alien to our organism, okay? So what you're seeing a lack of close friendship, a lack of family bonds, a lack of or a high level of socioeconomic inequality, and almost no time spent outdoors in the industrialized populations. And this is contributing to chronic stress, which is contributing to the ravaging of the body. Okay, so let me move on here.